Hello and welcome to In the Art Scene podcast, an art podcast that has it all. I'm your host, Galina Marquez, and I invite fascinating people to talk about their personal creative journeys, success stories, and inspiration. We talk about art business and marketing, how to find your creative voice, and all the new trends in the art world like NFT, AI, and such. Join me and my guest for today's conversation. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to In the Art Scene podcast. And I am having, another amazing artist with me today, Annalise Neil. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
You did, yeah.
A painter and a printmaker from San Diego, California. I mean, you guys, you just need to see her cyanotypes. I have never seen anything like that. And I am dying to know how she's doing it. So I will give a word to her to properly introduce herself. Annalise, hi, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. So as you said, I do cyanotypes, and I've been doing them for about 3 years. And prior to that, actually in 2006, I received my BFA in printmaking from the College of St. Rose in upstate New York. And so that really developed my love of paper, especially, and I've continued to work on paper. So I did printmaking, and then I had 2 sons, so that kind of was big and life-changing and all-consuming. And during that time, I really got into watercolor because it's a medium that's easy to, go in and out of. It doesn't require a lot of elaborate prep. So, and then a couple of years ago, a friend came to me and suggested cyanotype. And at that time I said, no, don't worry. I'm busy. I have other things. I don't have time. And she kept insisting. And I finally said, okay, we'll try. And it was absolute love at first pass. I completely fell in love with the alchemy of it. And, just all of it, the simplicity, the elegance, the how it looks just on every level. So, by now I'm hybrid fusing the watercolor and the cyanotype. And in a way, it loops back to some of my printmaking. So that's a little bit of a nutshell overview of what I do, where I am now.
Yeah, you're not the first cyanotype artist on this podcast, but I have never seen anything like this, honestly. So, and we'll get to it. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background. How did you start? How did you get to the art program? Just, about your life.
Yeah. So my parents are both artists.
Oh.
So I think, clearly I was always interested in visual thinking. And they're both very creative people and look at the world in that way, very sensitive. So I was always raised noticing things, I did some art in high school, not a whole lot. I actually did jewelry making, not really much with drawing and painting. And then I started college as a photography major, and I was paying my own way. So it was very slow. It took me about 10 years to get my degree. The last 2 years, we were, my husband now and I were living in upstate New York. He was doing schooling there, and I realized the art department was just down the street from where we were living. And I thought, I hadn't completed my degree. I'm just going to check it out. And so I went, and that school had the largest printmaking facility in all of New York State at that time. And I was like, well, I'm going to go for it because I don't know what's happening here, but this looks incredible. All of this equipment and the print presses and the tables. So I just kind of leapt with both feet into printmaking, even though I didn't have a background in that, and loved it. I really loved all of the process around it and, the precision. And I think a lot of that training has helped me now with watercolor and cyanotype. You really, at least the way I do it, there's a degree of precision involved that I think the printmaking training really helped me with. So that's kind of a little bit of the background to where I am now.
Are you originally from New York?
No, we ended up there because my husband's schooling, but I moved around a lot, kind of all over the west of the United States. I don't really feel like I'm from anywhere, but I graduated high school in the Phoenix, Arizona area. So that's an easy place to say that I'm from, but I'm not really. I'm just, I moved around a lot.
I'm just curious how you ended up in San Diego. Although San Diego art community is just amazing and vibrant.
Yeah.
But I have heard different opinions that San Diego is way more laid back and not as dynamic as New York, for example. So if you started your art career in New York, upstate New York, I mean, in that area, I was thinking that maybe that's something more exciting. But you ended up here, which we're happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
to have you here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been fortunate enough to live, in a number of places in the United States and to get a sense for different communities and how, at least through my lens, how they're engaging with creativity and all kinds of arts. And so I basically grew up all the way through my 20s in the West, and then moved back East. And I was 4 years in New York and 4 years in Philadelphia before I came to San Diego. And it really was eye-opening. The East Coast, just as a broad generalization, there really is a much more deeply engaged connection with the arts in the East. I feel like versus the West, there's pockets here. And I think, San Diego is really evolving and becoming a much more connected and vibrant scene. But yeah, I think the East Coast, at least for now, there's a bit more commitment, like community commitment to showing up for events and, large to small. So I'm really grateful that I was able to live there for that time and feel that, because I know what I want. I like that.
Yeah.
Degree, that level of engagement it's wonderful.
Yeah, I wonder why it is. Maybe because New York is closer to Europe, or
yeah, it's
they're
a
getting
good
more
question.
of that vibe.
Yeah, and I had the pleasure of being in New York again this summer. I hadn't been back for, I think, 12 years, and it was so great to feel that energy again. I was both upstate and for a workshop, and then also in New York City, and it really was. I was like, oh, this feels so good. There's just so much, I went to music performances, art things, and it felt so part of the community. It wasn't a special thing. It was just like a thing that people did. That's how it felt to me. But, granted, I was on holiday in a way. So yeah,
well,
it was great.
Nonetheless, we're happy to have you here in San Diego.
Thank you.
The more people like you we have, the more vibrant San Diego art scene is going to be. So
yeah.
Well, I'm gonna jump right into your cyanotypes. So they are so surrealistic. I mean, talking to other cyanotype artists, I kind of understand the process. It's the exposure to the sun with some chemicals, and then whatever gets exposed turns blue. Whatever doesn't get exposed remains white, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but I'm looking at your pieces, and I cannot even imagine what is that you are placing on the paper to get that texture, because they're foamy, they're wavy. You have like the whole ocean scenes, and they're the compositions are very interesting, like mandalic shapes, circles, geometrical shapes. It's just, I mean, it is mind blowing.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much.
I can't even start thinking about the process, how you do it. So I hope you're going to share a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that. Like any artist in their craft, we approach the creation of images from the inside, but it's so cool to hear how the viewer engages, because it's so, I don't know, that's what we live for. I love to know what people think. I think by nature, visual arts is, and most arts, it's a community thing. It's meant to be shared, and it's meant, to have that engagement. So I love that. Yeah. In terms of how I'm making them, as I said, I've been doing it for about 3 years now. So it's been an evolution. I've gone through quite a few different phases, but, in a nutshell, I'm primarily working on paper. I'm sort of engaging with fabric a little bit, but for the most part, it's paper. And as you say, I use a light sensitive fluid, which I paint very intentionally on the paper. I don't tend to go edge to edge. I often will paint shapes with the fluid, and we'll do, sometimes a single exposure and sometimes multiple sequential exposures. In terms of building my compositions, I have developed this method where I make individual negatives of a thing. So using all my own photographs, by now I have hundreds of these little things, but so I travel a lot. I spend a lot of time in nature. Like everybody, I've got my smartphone with the camera and I'm constantly snapping pictures. I also use a nice camera, but the reality is I mostly use my smartphone and taking pictures of things and then uploading them to Lightroom, and I convert it into a negative. Then I print that onto overhead projection film and then cut it out. So each image in my cyanotype is a unique negative that I've made from one of my photographs. So I have them organized into folders like birds, mushrooms, people, places. And then I'll get a concept around how I want to, what is it that I'm trying to say with this piece? Let's say it's a mushroom piece. I'll pull all my mushroom negatives. I lay everything out. So it's kind of this insane, manic, field of black and white negatives everywhere. And then I just intuitively build the composition with these negatives. So after that, you put glass on the negatives, and then you can use any UV light to expose. And that's the sun or an exposure unit. And I do use both. So once I have done the composition, made the exposure, rinsed it, it cures for about 24 hours, and then I glue it to a wood substrate. And after that, I apply watercolor paint.
Wow.
So it can be, it's a very long process, and a lot of, at many points, I'm working blind. Like I'm not sure how it's going to work. And, certainly with the exposures where there's multiple shapes, at every point it could get ruined. So I'm always, praying to the art gods, please work, please exposure. Or, if you accidentally get a little fingerprint or a little flick of the fluids, and sometimes you just roll with that. But there's a lot of crossing fingers involved.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I mean, the fluid for cyanotypes it's transparent, right? So you don't really see it on the paper until it gets exposed.
It's actually like a pale pea green, like a puce green. But you apply it in the semi-dark, so you can't
you really can't
see. Yeah, I mean, different cyanotype artists are more loose with the light. I'm a little bit more fussy about making sure my space is dark, but yeah, essentially, I have to just hope that my shapes work the way that I want them to.
So how long does it take you to complete one piece?
It's really tough to say. I mean, there was a time where I would keep track of time per piece, but it's almost too hard.
On average, like you're feeling like, okay, it takes me a week about or whatever.
Sure. I would say, let's say it's like a 10-inch square. Maybe that's going to be 10 to 20 hours, I would say. But
it's not 20 hours consecutively,
exactly.
Right? It's multiple days.
Yes, multiple days, multiple moments. As I said, I'm a mom, so it's like, work for a couple hours, attend to whatever domestic thing, but that's most people's lives. It's hard to find big chunks of uninterrupted time. So and right now I have 7 pieces I'm working on. So I'll work on this guy for a little bit and then I go over here. So it's also a lot harder to keep, accurate track.
Yeah.
But give or take, they're pretty labor intensive.
Wow. How old are your sons now?
They are 10 and 13.
Okay.
It's kind of hard to believe, but yes, they're cruising towards the, both being in the teen years.
Well, at least they're a little bit more autonomous. So you have a little chunks of day that you can attend to your art. Yeah. I can imagine when they were little, it was much, much more difficult.
It was, yeah. And they're just, after when they were very little, I I didn't do anything creative, and it was really hard. So there was a point at which I knew that I had to reclaim that part of myself, my identity. And, that's when I started doing the watercolor paint. And thankfully, I have a partner who was able to support me. And, I could, a couple evenings a week, just leave and go into the studio and work. So,
yeah. The reason I'm asking is because I have 5-month-old baby.
Oh, wow.
And I'm also struggling because I don't have any studio time.
Yeah.
So at what point you decided, like, what's the right age, or at least what felt right to you when you decided, okay, well, from now on, I'm going to have my studio time no matter what?
I really, it went too long, to be honest. I probably didn't really claim that again until probably 4 years into parenting.
Wow.
It was too long, and by that point I was, really desperate for it. So, if, it's just so hard because, the baby's napping, so you could work, but then you need to nap, or, so I think everybody's going to try to piece it together in the way that they need to. But, it was too long. So definitely try if you can somehow. But 5 months is very young. That's hard.
I know. I have my like very little scheduled chunks of time to do this podcast, which I'm also grateful for my husband to help me do that. But yeah, I mean, our son happened to be not a really good napper.
Yeah.
So, and that, half an hour, if I'm lucky, I have like, you usually have like a bunch of like dishes in the sink and a laundry that you need to do. And there are some days when I'm like, oh, heck it. I just, dishes will wait.
Yeah.
But it's still not
true.
enough.
And I'm still trying to figure out that balance, because my studio is in my house, which, inevitably then you walk past the dishes or, oh, what are we having for dinner? Or, it's so easy to get that stuff in the way of the work. It's just hard. It's really hard to have a balance.
Well, I am happy to hear that you were able to reclaim that part of yourself and you are back working fully and producing lots of amazing work. So you mentioned also like you enhance your cyanotypes, because I looked at them and you said that you're doing watercolor. To me, it also looks like there's some ink involved, or
it's actually just watercolor.
Just watercolor.
Yeah, I just use a really tiny brush. It's, picture the most teeny tiny little amount of bristles, and that's what it is. So a lot of people think that there's pen involved, but it's all brushwork. It's just very fine.
Wow.
So and mostly I'm using white, so that the palette does tend to stay blue and white, but I'm shifting much more into color. So
I noticed some reds.
I'm really drawn to red and yellow and just that very simple primary color palette. So the newer work has that in it as well. And then a little variation. So into pinks and into yellows. My older watercolor work is all warm tones. It's very fluid, very fleshy, very warm. And then the cyanotype work is so cool toned. So I'm seeking to kind of bridge that a little bit more with the newer work.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit. So your process is so elaborate, so precise, to the point that you are using like a couple Bristol brushes to like as your final step. Is that feeling for you like a meditative process, or like because I know that some artists are trying to kind of let go and whatever happens, and there are other artists who are more precise. So how do you feel about your process, and why do you choose to be so precise?
So that's a great question. I love to work in a precise way. I do find it really meditative and relaxing. The piece that I'm just about done with now is a series of discs, and there's 3 of them, and coming from, an unseen top realm are these almost like beads, chain beads. chains of beads, I guess we would say. And each one is probably a millimeter, and it's an open circle.
Wow.
So sometimes, just for curiosity, I like to count how many repetitive things I paint. So I just did like a casual count, and each chain I think is about 150 individual circles. And there's, I think, 11 or 12 of these chains coming down. I don't know why I like to keep track of these metrics, but I'll just sit there hunched over and do these teeny tiny, I love it. It's my favorite thing when I work into a piece, something super repetitive like that. So I do love it. I love the fine detail. I often work small. And I think for me, something about the scale and the attention to detail, my hope is that it draws people in, because it's small and precise. As a viewer, you're kind of asked to step forward and really move in to that space. And a concept that I really find interesting, that I've heard a couple of times in philosophy and in other realms, is that attention is linked to consciousness. And I think we've all had that feeling when we're really engaged with something, looking or listening or feeling, it's this amazing, almost euphoria, So that's, I think, a gift that really small, precise work can give the viewer, is that moment of really being drawn in and moved away from, whatever is going on in your life. So that's something that I can't imagine ever making work that's super big and loose, because I love that, getting pulled in to an alternate world feeling that I feel like sometimes my work can have.
Yeah, when you were talking about how many of those little circles you have in your one of the latest pieces, I kept thinking, like, the word chanting mantra came in mind, because that's what you do. Like when you are chanting mantra, it's like 108 times you're doing it very repetitively. So yeah, I can see why it is meditative, and why how it penetrates the consciousness, and your attention gets into a very, very, like, a laser focus.
Yeah. I find it so relaxing. I know some people look at it and they're like, that's crazy. That you must be manic or something.
Yeah, no, I would be one of those people for sure.
I don't know. I love it.
So I'm curious to know a little bit about what you were expressing with your work, because you mentioned at the very beginning that it all comes from within, and I cannot avoid noticing how surrealistic they are. They are clearly communicating a very, very deep message. So I am very curious to know more about that.
Yeah, so I am a voracious reader, and I'm very interested in philosophy and physics and ecology. So my work generally is reflecting what I'm reading on some level. I also listen to a lot of podcasts, so big podcast fan here. And, I feel like, as humans, we go through the world, we receive information, we process it, and ideally it changes us in some way to the better, or we become more enlarged in how we're thinking about ourselves and our world. And, so I'll read something like, for example, this year, at the beginning of the year, I read Rob Dunn's book, A Natural History of the Future. So he looks to the ecology of the past to make predictions about the future. And I thought some of the things that he presented were so incredible. So I'm reading these things and, coming away with these concepts, and then I can turn them into images. So a lot of my work is very directly related in that way, very, very connected. So that book was big for this year. Carlo Rovelli is somebody that I'm really influenced by. He's an Italian theoretical physicist. The way that he talks about huge concepts like quantum entanglement and the relational nature of reality, he's able to do it in such a way that they really land with me in these powerful ways that I can kind of turn into visual metaphors. So, those are just two people. I also read Rebecca Solnit's A Field Guide to Getting Lost, which was written in 2005. That's a series of essays in which she's talking about the unknown and what it means to be vulnerable. And I don't know if you had a chance to read that, but
I have not, but I'm getting increasingly more interested.
She's incredible. It's really beautiful writing, and I kind of circle around certain concepts all the time. And for whatever reason, I listened to it as an audiobook this summer, and it just really resonated for me. But in general, I'm always kind of coming back to these ideas, the ideas of perception, how that is so relative to the individual doing the perceiving. I'm really interested in the idea of the unknown, what we don't know. I'm interested in ecology in a very grounded, real way, our natural ecologies, but also psychological ecologies, in a metaphorical way. So I basically research a lot of these scientific and philosophical tenets, and then I weave them into the visual compositions that I'm building, kind of with the hope. It's always tricky, as an artist, to know how much to say about the work, because you want the viewer to be able to come to it on their own terms. So I don't have a solid answer on how much I like to say versus, I like to leave a breadcrumb trail, and sometimes the titles of the work will be suggestive. And then if a viewer wants to dig in a little bit more, they can. But I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out that balance about how much to say about the work.
I think it's the viewer will have their own perception, their own understanding, despite how much you're going to say about this, because the everybody's perception is still different.
Yeah.
But having an insight in like what you were putting into the artwork, like, to me, it's actually very interesting, because I already have my own perception of the work that I saw from you, and having an input of those ideas that I'm not familiar with, gives me a totally different angle, and it kind of blends with my perception. Like, okay, now I'm getting my own like childhood memories of being inspired by Salvador Dali and his understanding of time, and all the other things. So it's really interesting. Speaking of which, you dropped the word psychological ecology.
Yeah.
Which like, that's a new term for me. If you don't mind elaborating on that a little bit, I would appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's connected to that idea of perception, like our inner landscape, and I don't know how we form our idea of reality, how we form belief, I think is super interesting. There's I don't know if you've heard of the economist Daniel Kahneman. He wrote where is it? I have it back here on my shelf. Oh, thinking fast and slow. And he talks about this idea that we have system 1 and system 2, and it has to do with how, I don't know, almost like how we're raised, what ideas are presented to us really does make a deep impression on how we engage with the world. And then as we move through the world, we encounter things, and that lives in kind of a different way, but it's how these two systems work inside of us. And then I don't know how we connect and perceive other people. So I'm definitely interested in the inner landscape. And another thing that he talks about is the web of approximation, how humans are always making approximate gestures. Like our brains can't handle all the information that we're receiving. So we're making approximations all the time, so it's almost like this idea that, I don't know, we do the best we can. You know what I mean? Both developing our own beliefs, making decisions about other people. And I'm right now, I don't have like a really concrete sense of it. I'm really mulling it over and thinking about this idea of how things pass through us into other people, how ideas pass through communities, so I don't know, I'm kind of rambling here, but I'm just interested in the idea of transmission you
Mm-hmm.
know, within ourselves, but also from person to person and community to community.
I'm kind of picking on some keywords here and trying to make connections with the other things that you said today. So you were saying about our brain making the approximation, and at the same time, your work is so precise. So it's almost like you're trying to grasp the precision that we're missing in our perception.
Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, I do. Yeah, I wonder. Maybe you're right. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that makes sense. Yeah, I another body of work that I did last year was related to mycelium and the mushroom network underground. So again, it's this idea of connection and transmission of ideas, and I'm definitely interested in a network, way of thinking, and like how do we share and how do we connect, um, person to person and within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but yeah.
Well, it's very interesting. So, do you have a favorite piece of work that you have ever done that is the most like in your own way, the most like that it, okay, I'm rambling now. Please cut this out.
Okay.
That's the note from my editor.
Okay.
Um, do you have a favorite piece of work that in encounters like the most important idea that you were trying to convey?
Something I am really interested is the idea of progress also.
Uh-huh.
So there's a piece of mine called propulsive molt, and it's a square, it's a 10-inch square. It shows a cone inside of a cone, and then coming out of the cone is a globe, an orb shape. So in the technical terms, it's 3 separate exposures. So I did the leftmost cone as one exposure, and then the center cone, and then the globe. And what it's showing is the first cone is actually a hot spring. So there are these layers of mineral buildup that you can see in hot springs. And the second cone shows other rigid things like shells and barnacles. And then the globe is kind of this expansive movement out. So I'm interested in the idea of like evolution and growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason why I use the imagery that I did is the first cone is one solid block of rigidity. The second cone shows rigidity, but it's broken, like there's a softening happening. And then the orb shape, it's showing kind of this explosion. So it's this movement from rigidity to movement, and I think that this is something that I just read in a book by Carlo Rovelli called Helgoland. And I just, I'm really thinking about it a lot lately on a personal level. But it's this idea that the best way to learn is to interact with the world while seeking to understand it, readjusting our mental schemes to what we encounter and find. I think it's really easy to get stuck in a groove that's rigid,
Mm-hmm.
because as humans, we're always seeking patterns and it's firm ground under our feet, and that's really helpful and important. But I think this idea of growth within our lives is super important, and readjusting how we're thinking about things. So, that piece that I described, propulsive molt, talks about that. Like how can we get rid of some things that are not serving us anymore, that are kind of holding us back from evolving in one form or another.
Yeah, well, very interesting. I will make sure to put that image into the show notes so people
Okay.
know what we're talking about.
Awesome.
Yeah. So are you doing cyanotypes now exclusively, or are you still doing the watercolor work?
I am really focused on the cyanotype, but I am trying to incorporate a lot more paint. So rather than, before, the cyanotype has been very central, I'm trying to leave more white space and then engage the paint in a different way. And I haven't nailed it. Like it's definitely something that I'm struggling, or, it's a space that I'm living in and trying to move through and figure out. It's kind of a problem in a good way. It's a thing that I'm dealing with. So the newer work, it's still cyanotype, but it does have a lot more paint. So yeah, trying to kind of bring those two worlds together in a little bit of a way.
So, what is the idea in bringing them together? Is there, like, again, I'm assuming that there is a deeper meaning for bridging those two worlds.
It's a meaning, but also a feeling. The paintings that I used to make are much more, they're very almost fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
They have almost a spiritual, metaphysical quality. Everything that I would paint is a figment of my imagination. So it's pure, me and my creation. Whereas in the cyanotype, I'm responding to a physical thing, like a flower, a bird. They're very specific and high focus nouns in a way. So I'm trying to bring in almost that metaphysical quality to the very physical sense that I have in the cyanotype work. And also with the cyanotype, it's very crisp, it's very clean, it's blue and white, whereas the other work that I was doing was much more fluid. And I guess I'm going to come back to that surreal or fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it's an interesting visual challenge to see if I can fuse those things, and what's going to be the result. Maybe I'll see it and I'm thinking, no, this is better over here and this is better over here. But I'm just keen to see if I can make it work in a way that feels like I'm hitting both things, that I'm interested in, which, it's fun. It feels really exciting to be trying something out of my comfort zone. And I feel like this is maybe like a cliche thing with art, but I feel personally that if I'm a little scared about what I'm doing and uncomfortable, that means I'm doing it right. If I'm too much in a routine, that it just feels like a production at a certain point. And I always want to feel a little scared, and uncomfortable, and like I'm pushing myself. Mm-hmm. And that tells me that I'm probably in a good place.
Yeah, that's the idea that I get from other artists too, and I think like I'm personally not quite there yet. I can't quite get to the point where I embrace this discomfort.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to get there. So what you were talking about just now kind of reminds me of another conversation I had earlier in the season, which you will hear later. It's not on air at the moment when we're recording, but I had another artist who was doing cyanotypes, and she's working with the Amazon tribe from Ecuador. Mm. And the whole idea of her work and working with that tribe is that connecting the physical world and the spirit world, which in that tribe is actually all the same. So there's no duality for them. That physical is physical and the spirit is spirit. It's all the same thing. It's merged. And for the Western society, like for us, those are two different concepts. So she's trying to kind of merge it together, and so that's kind of the same idea that I heard from you, saying that you were bringing your spiritual, more of the fantasy world from your paintings, and the cyanotypes that are responding to actually like physical objects. So that's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, that's I love to hear that. And it actually reminds me, there's a second century Buddhist philosophical text by Nagarjuna. And in that, he says nothing exists in itself independently from something else. And it's true. There's something about the modern Western mind that has really separated, the mental or metaphysical and physical, and a lot of what I'm reading now, there's absolutely no barrier. We've decided that there is, and that's, I don't know, it's kind of powerful. If we can, those of us who are not there, if we could kind of bridge those two things, like how we would perceive ourselves and other humans and other living things, and how our stewardship of the world might change if we think of it as, there's another interesting, I have it written down somewhere, I don't know where, I'll paraphrase, but that we all exist on a sensation gradient, but we're all completely connected. Like the reality is a gradient, and where you end and where I begin, it doesn't really exist, So I think the same thing goes with the mental world, the mental, emotional, spiritual world, and the physical world. If we can, I'm very interested in that conversation.
Yeah, and it kind of makes a complete sense now about pretty much everything we were talking about in terms of your work and how you're exploring the ideas of connection on different levels. And the mushroom series, what's the word? I forgot it.
Mycelium.
Mycelium.
Yes.
Yeah. How the information is being spread, or that's actually, it's the research now, right? So we proved already that plants are sharing the information with each other, and different species of plants through the mycelium, right? So it's the real, like, World Wide Web.
Yes.
Before we invented it.
That's right.
And then there's a human level in the physical world, and then there's a metaphysical world. So how you connect all those levels with the precision work that you do. So kind of like the whole conversation kind of now gets into the total clear point of what you're working on. Okay, we're done here. Goodbye.
Okay. Check.
Yes. But no, yeah, it really does kind of now paints the whole picture for me. Like, we spend 45 minutes talking about different things that, again, for the Western mind, probably very difficult to comprehend and like altogether. So they're almost like one by one by one by one. But with this conversation, it all kind of glued together and brings the whole picture. Like, it's really like it's almost like you are writing a Bible in a way with your paintings, because you are trying to combine so many difficult ideas in your artwork that it's gonna take people time and really a lot of attention and that laser focus to go through your work one piece at a time to get to that idea, because I think it's something that maybe not very much accessible to a lot of people just yet.
Right. Yeah. That's I've debated doing separate writings, like I said, if somebody had an interest, they wanted to dive a little deeper, that would be available, which I might do. But it did occur to me a couple of months ago that my work feels to me more like a visual essay. It's not exactly correct, but the concept to me is super important. It's not about, the image is almost like a little beautiful hook, and then hopefully somebody's drawn in because they're curious about what they see. And then the next step would be like, what is this about? And that's the hope that then the concept would come into the conversation.
Yeah, I almost see, you were talking about writings, and I almost see like you need to have some sort of a manual or a dictionary.
Right. Yes, that's true. I should. Little guide.
Yeah.
Index.
Well, in that, in that sense, it also kind of it brings your work to a different level, because it will be not only the visual perception, it will be also another level of information that people will take in to enhance their perception of your work and the ideas that you're trying to convey. So, yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
I see a book in your future.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, it is really important to me that people get the concepts too. So it makes sense because, looking at a picture that shows some birds and a flower, you're not going to get all the way to what I'm talking about. It's
Yeah.
not, it's there, and again, like the titles that I use and the breadcrumb trail thing, but it's
Well,
it's a good idea.
I like to think that this episode is going to be the beginning of people's understanding the deeper meaning of your work. And then I look forward to hearing about the book or some sort of writing from you in the future. When you
Thank
do
you.
that, I'll bring you
Okay.
back. I'll bring you back. We're going to talk about that for another hour.
Awesome. Very cool. I love that idea.
Yeah. So is there something I did not ask you that you would like to talk about?
I guess I could talk a little bit about, just to the beginning of the conversation, I'm in a couple of virtual classes right now with I'm in 2 classes with 2 different teachers, and we've been talking a lot about art, being an artist, and kind of the idea of like, what is the role of visual art in the modern life? And so that's something that I'm thinking a lot about is, what as a society, what this does for us, and as an artist, do you need to ask permission to make the work, or like who gets to make it and who gets to see it and all of those things, and this kind of relates to the San Diego art scene, which, as I was saying, I think it is really growing in awesome ways. But I think the community piece is just so important, coming together and coming for shows and having conversations. I really appreciate your podcast and what you're doing for the community. But, it's this idea that we make our own path through this, and there's no script for how to be an artist and how to make this world, but that the community is so important, so the more that we come together and show up for each other and have these conversations, it's what makes all of this vibrant and possible.
Amen. Let's bring more people in.
Yes, exactly.
Sure. So speaking of classes, I think you mentioned the workshop at the beginning, and I assume it's a workshop that you were teaching. So are you teaching anything anywhere?
Actually, that one was not. I was a student for that.
Okay.
But at this time, I don't have anything scheduled to teach. There's a possibility that next summer I might do some, but at the moment I don't.
Okay. Well, maybe next summer.
Yes,
it
I'll
will be
keep you posted.
another time. Yes, for another episode with you.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, we are pretty much at the top of the hour. I really ran out of questions.
Okay.
And I think we covered a lot of ground, and I am super excited. I like now I'm going to look at your work with totally different eyes.
Oh, thank you.
That's amazing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
That's the advantage of having a podcast.
Right. You get
Yes.
inside tracks to all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
It's so inspiring. Well, I also like to ask my guests for some words of inspiration for whoever is listening to us, because majority of the listeners are artists. A lot of them are at the beginning of their careers. They have their own doubts, imposter syndromes, you name it. Mm-hmm. And there are, or some people who are just creative and interested in maybe trying themselves and being artists in the future. So some words of encouragement, some words of wisdom, inspiration, whatever you can offer.
Yeah. I have a couple things. I'm trying to think of what would be a good one.
Oh, do both.
Okay, let's see. So this is actually a quote from the Carlo Rovelli book that I just recently finished. I'll just read it because he said it well. Our prejudices concerning how reality is made are just the result of our experience, and our experience is limited. So, it's connected to that idea that we have our idea of what reality is, but the more that we experience, the more that we can adjust, and that maybe doesn't seem like an obvious connection to being an artist, but I think that it's that idea of just getting out there, connecting to your community, taking a class that's out of your comfort level, whatever it is, to just keep going and keep pursuing and trying new things. Keep reading all the time. I think music, literature, cooking classes, whatever it is, to keep passionate about something is going to come through in the work that you make. And
that's so true.
Yeah. And I think also just not being limited in how you define art and creativity. I think there's so many ways to do it. And maybe it's how you're baking a loaf of bread, or how you're folding your laundry, or, I think that there's ways to feel that you're productive. Maybe it's your garden, or, and then that we go through phases of fine art production and maybe not. You have to kind of let your field lie fallow for a while to come back with renewed vigor to your practice, however that may be. And then I can end with another quote that I came across from Rebecca Solnit's book. That's another one that I'm just spending a lot of time with it right now. So I don't have like this fully prescriptive way of thinking about it, but I don't know. For me, it's just really provocative. And what it is that she's actually quoting from Plato. So the quote is this: "How will you go about finding that thing, the nature of which is totally unknown to you?" So I think it's, again, that idea of being willing to make mistakes, being willing to push into other places that you're not comfortable, but that idea of always kind of pursuing, we just don't know what we don't know. So
yeah, exactly.
Anyway, I'm just really, I love that quote.
I love that too. Yeah, it's like how do you discover something that you don't know with the tools and the knowledge that you have, right?
Yeah,
So,
and it's related to the idea of perception. Like how much are you seeing? Can you see more? Which I don't know. It's an interesting practice.
It is really interesting practice, and I totally I so agree with you on both points that you made, that enriching our world as an artist, having as many experiences as possible will enrich your creativity. And just don't be afraid of the unknown and push yourself out of the comfort zone, which is I'm taking as a personal message for myself.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, it's every day, right?
Yeah,
every day you have to remind yourself we're doing the best we can, but yeah.
All right. Well, Annalise, thank you so much for your time today. I so appreciate that you're spending a whole hour on your Saturday morning talking to me about this global ideas. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I so appreciate your thoughtful questions and your attention. It means a lot to me.
Oh, a pleasure is all mine. Well, thank you again. And we'll make sure to put all the links in the show notes. So you guys, if you want to know what we were talking about, please refer to the show notes. There will be a link to Annalise's website, her social media accounts, some imagery that we were talking about today, so you have an idea of how the conversation was progressing and what the details that Annalise was describing. Please subscribe to our podcast and please share. I mean, we're talking about some freaking important things here. So if you guys like it, don't forget to share it, because that is important for all the artists that are here on my podcast and for myself. The more people hear about this, the better. And I think we're gonna make the world a little better place, and we're gonna make art scene a little bit richer if we just share with each other. All right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll see you again in the art scene. It has been another episode of In the Art Scene podcast. If you liked today's conversation, please give us a good review on Apple and go listen to other great stories. Check out our website intheartscene.com or follow us on Instagram at intheartscene for more content. If you are a creative and you want to share your story, shoot us a message from the website or DM us on Instagram. Look forward to seeing you next time in the art scene.